And the agenda also contains links to the City of Annapolis website where you can fill in comments, written or oral comments, if you'd like to have comments before the board. And finally, you'll also find a link to the city's database for information about cases that are before the board tonight. Before we get started, let me remind everyone that communications with the board about any case by anyone other than a party to the case must go through the comment form that I just referred to. And all communications by parties must go through the board liaison, Kim Consoli, to my right. No one should contact any of the member of the board directly about any case pending before the board. So we'll start with a roll call, if you would. Kim?
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Dr. Chen,
Present.
Mr. Hector,
Present.
we have Mr. Walsh remotely, Mr. Ramsden,
Present.
and Mr. Zazali due any minute. That would be member.
For all of you who haven't heard the news, we've been favored by the mayor with an appointment of an alternate member of the board, Clinton Ramsden. We welcome him tonight. Thank you for volunteering. So the next item of business would be the agenda. Have members of the board had a chance to look at the agenda? Are there any corrections or additions?
No.
No.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Michael. We can hear you very well.
As I can hear you, Bob.
Good. That cleared up. Next, we'll have the minutes. We've got some minutes from the meeting of March. No, the meeting of what minutes?
February.
February 4th.
Fourth.
Do we have any corrections or additions to the minutes? Is there a motion?
I
So
move
moved.
to approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Approved unanimously. Thank you very much. So the first business on the agenda tonight, note for the record that Mr. Zali has joined us. The first case tonight will be a conference in an appeal relating to 501 6th Street, case number ZON 2501-01, fence 24087. We have anyone representing the applicant? No? All right, well then, let's start. Huh? Yes. We understand that the applicant had planned to be here. Why don't we put this aside and take up the variant next and come back to this, give her a chance to get here. We don't want anyone to be excluded. So that brings us to variance 24018, variance application by Ashby Williams for disturbance to slopes of 15% or greater in the critical area for the construction of a new pool with associated retaining wall at a property located at 111 Archwood Street. I should say before we start that these folks are my neighbors. They're not quite a block away. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know them, except to say hello as we pass walking our dogs on the street. So, welcome. Who would like to introduce the case for the city?
Mr. Chair, I would. Mike Meekins, senior planner in planning and zoning. The application before you, or the case before you tonight, is in reference to steep slope variance for disturbance to allow construction of a new pool and associated retaining wall. The steep slopes are isolated on the property and quite possibly man-made. I would add that the applicant has properly posted the property and sent out mailings. They also did receive Planning and Zoning did receive 5 letters of support for the application. And lastly, I had one correction in my staff report. I misworded a condition, and that miswording was regarding a grading permit and stormwater management. This application may not need a full-blown grading permit, simply a building permit. So I would like to say that in my condition number 1, if a grading permit is required, then they would have to do stormwater management. So that is a miswording that I put in my report.
Understand? All right, would someone like to be heard on behalf of the applicants?
Hi, my name is Mark Evans from Drum Loykin Associates. We're the civil engineers that worked with the property owners with this building permit application and the variance application. And I just wanted to let everyone know, in reviewing the case and in reviewing Mike's findings and recommendations, we worked hard with the city. The main thing that I think is important is the fact that this property is on a corner of 3 different roads, and the Amos Garrett portion of the property, which is on the backside where the pool is going, has a 30-foot front yard buffer, just like the Archwood Road portion of the property. When we were working to site this with the city, rather than, the pool had to be at least 30 feet away, we pushed the pool up towards the existing garage. The existing slopes that are on this property, which Mike mentioned, are isolated, or a lawn area that slopes off the side of their garage down towards Amos Garrett. There's no woods, there's no clearing. The retaining wall that you'll see on the plan for the pool helps us really reduce the amount of impact to that small area of slopes. We felt like we worked pretty hard to try and keep the disturbance at a minimum. We do need a administrative adjustment for the 30-foot, because we pushed the pool as far as we thought we could to get away from Amos Garrett, but not go into those slopes any further than we were. And so, as part of a separate application for an administrative adjustment, we have a 5.8-foot administrative adjustment. We pushed the pool 24 feet off of Amos Garrett, just at the edge of those slopes, and we're building a retaining wall to minimize those. Thank you.
Okay. Questions from the board or council? Let me ask, well, never mind. What is the additional lot coverage?
So the original lot coverage was 2,818. This is an IDA lot within the critical area, and our new lot coverage is 3,765 square feet.
What's that?
So it's an increase of about 870 square feet.
You may escape, as Mike pointed out, the requirement for stormwater management, but with an increase in lot coverage of that magnitude, I would certainly urge you to consider some kind of stormwater management. The city's got a big problem. We all share in that problem, and when someone's making big changes like this, it's a great opportunity to help us solve that common problem.
Understood. Thank you. And we did consider that when we were looking at the people familiar with the MDE manual and the different stormwater managements that you can do. In a situation like this, one of the benefits of us sliding the pool away from Amos Garrett is the pool width is about 20 feet between the patio and the pool. The pool is only a 10 by 20 therapeutic pool. It creates a 25-foot area of grass, existing grass now, grass from the pool down towards Amos Garrett. And in the MDE manual, as part of the design criteria, we have mitigation requirements, which we'll meet with plantings for the site, but we also create a 25-foot disconnect area which is part of the MDE criteria that you can do disconnect for non-rooftop things. So we have an area that's wider than the pool, which is the normal criteria for disconnect. So we have thought it through. If we have to do it, we will work with the city in a grading permit to do that. But we do actually, in the way the design is laid out, do provide that disconnect credit for the pool.
Do you know, let me ask, do you know what the rules are for draining down the pool?
Draining it down, like in the winter when
Yeah,
you're.
right.
I can't say, sir, that I know
I've
the
seen-
specific rules for that.
I've seen in some places, people are just pumping it into the curb, and it's running right down. All that chlorine is running right down into the creek, which is just a few hundred feet down.
And I think property owners would be happy to work with a pool company to have that pumped to a tanker truck and not just run down the curb of Amos Garrett to
I
the
think
to
it's
the road.
acceptable, actually, if you just pump it onto lawn. But that-
Just the same
yeah.
effect that chlorine has doesn't necessarily do great for the grass, but I hear what you're saying is
Oh, no.
from that
Chair Gallagher, I
perspective.
could maybe assuage
Yeah.
your concern there. Chlorine breaks down in the presence of sunlight and oxygen, and over the course of a few weeks, there's almost no chlorine present in the pool. So they just wait and stop treating it in the fall. That's the appropriate.
I apologize. Ashby just corrected me. It's a saltwater pool, not a chlorinated pool.
Good.
Sorry about that.
Sometimes we need higher salinity levels for the oysters. All right, any other questions for these?
It's on the subject of the stormwater management, the proposed site plan shows a trench drain that goes on the downhill side of the retaining wall, traces around the Page South portion of the property, and then just discharges or daylights.
So-
Who can speak to that?
So the trench drain is along the base of the retaining wall because we expect from that slope down from the retaining wall to be some seepage to let the water through. So that trench drain is designed there to basically pick up that slope water where it comes out through the weep holes. The center portion of the pool and the whatnot will obviously, the pool itself holds water. It doesn't really drain one way or another. There's a small area of the patio or coping, or not coping, patio around the pool that would drain back that way, but the rest of it, the pool itself holds the water. The northern part of the patio would drain to the grass, so it's that trench drain is capturing the runoff coming from the slope down through that retaining wall and also that thin area of patio.
So the 3-inch PVC pipe will just daylight.
Yes.
Like to see that sequestered rather than allowed. We could talk about that during.
I'm taking notes, Mike.
Yes, sir.
Anything else? Shall we deliberate this one and get it behind? Who would like to start? Senior member.
Well, I just have the one condition. I recognize it's only a 5-foot slope, less than a 5-foot slope change, a relatively modest retaining wall, and a therapeutic pool sounds awfully nice to me. So I would not want to stand in the way of that being allowed to be constructed. I would like to, the board to consider some affirming or, required stormwater management in terms of.
You're happy to leave that to Mr. Meekins to work
Absolutely.
out with him?
I trusted his, put that trust in his capability to raise the bar.
Any other discussion? Or a motion?
I move to approve variance 2024-00018 based on the report from Planning and Zoning as well as the testimony given today.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, that's unanimous. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you
Hope
for
you
hearing our
enjoy that
case.
pool.
Thank you very much.
You could have a dog swim day.
Yeah.
In a salt pool.
Still not here? Do we have our applicant from the fence appeal? No? Are you the applicant for the appellant? Yeah?
Yes, I have a hearing loss, so if you guys speak up, that would help.
Please,
So should I stay
please have a
here or
seat.
stand there?
Have a seat there.
Hi, what do I do? Start off with a statement or something? Okay. Okay.
All right, this is, again, this is Peel ZON 2501 and Fence 2024-07, 501 6th Street. Ms. Corres, let's start with you. You know, our rules, which we don't always follow, ask the director to file with the board a statement summarizing the basis for the decision appealed from within some time after an appeal is filed. I don't think we've enforced that, but could you start by sort of giving us an overview of the director's position on?
Sure. I'm going to
decision
actually
here?
have Mike
Yeah.
give the statement of what the director's decision was and the analysis of it was.
Good.
When you came to the decision.
Okay.
Just a summary.
So the application was for the increased height above 6 feet for two portions of a replacement fence. Through the review of that application and looking at references in the code, we felt that that was, or the department felt that that was not necessarily in keeping with the ability to approve that additional height. We felt that 6 foot was in the R2NC, something that is very compatible with the neighborhood. And the staff felt that that additional height was not necessarily, therefore, denied the application.
Can you give us a little clearer idea of what the criteria are that you applied in making that decision?
So there are allowances in the code for up to additional 2 feet of height. And I think the code was written and modified to prevent what is actually known as the Great Wall of Eastport, which was on, I believe, Chester Avenue, catty corner to Davis Pub, where a solid wall that was approximately 8 feet high was built and completely obstructed not only the view shed, but I'll go so far as to say light and air. And that predicated the change or the wording and verbiage within the code. The staff looked at similar situations or similar instances within the R2NC where the R2NC abutted the B1 zoning district. In my explanation in the report, I cited several examples of that. Two of which, I'll be quite frank with you, did not were not similar to the situation for this case, where you have a parking lot in a commercial zone abutting residential property. But there are two other examples, VIN 909 and now the Nancy Hammond Art Gallery, where those situations exist. And the fences that are there are not 7 feet, they're not 8 feet, they're 6 feet or lower.
Okay, so as I recall, the Great Wall, it ran parallel along whatever that street is.
I think it's Chester, but I'm not 100%.
And so it did, you said it blocked the view shed. If I recall from the photos of this application, the fence is perpendicular to the principal road. And so passersby would blink and miss it. And unlike VIN 909, where you've got a residence on the other side of the fence in this case is a commercial parking lot.
Correct.
So whose ox is gored there?
I'm sorry?
Who is prejudiced by the increased fence height in this situation?
I can't speak for the applicant or the owner. They are working together to block the view shed from portions of the residential property so that the owner does not see vehicles, possibly commercial vehicles, or large trucks, pickup trucks, vans.
Stored machinery and
May I speak?
not yet. You will have your chance shortly.
Thank you.
So they're not allowed to store construction vehicles like you're referring to on the property.
Right, but we all know enforcement sometimes is sticky.
That's true.
All right, ma'am. Let's hear from you.
Okay. Well, first of all, the 2 feet that we're requesting for increased height for this fence is only for 1/2 of the length of the fence. And that half is in the very back portion of the fence. It cannot be seen from the street. The only people who will clearly see that increased height will be people standing in my backyard or people in the commercial parking lot. So it's in the very back part of the fence. Secondly, in terms of the negative aspects of this, the view of the commercial vans and trucks is very high. It's overwhelming. It basically overwhelms the entire backyard. There's a loss of privacy, the inescapable and overwhelming bad view, and it also has a downward impact on the value of my property. And I did submit to all of you a packet which contained photos of the trucks parked next to the fence and also a statement from my realtor saying that with that kind of a situation with the trucks looming over the 6-foot fence, that the property would stay on the market longer and there would be a downward value assessed for that property because of the bad view. So secondly, I would call your attention to the fact that the city code basically says that no parking spaces serving a non-residential use should be located within 10 feet of a residential lot line. The cars and the vans are parked within 4 feet of the residential lot line, and which the fence is on the lot line. I also submitted a couple of pictures showing a whole row of cars and a pickup truck parked immediately next to the fence, which is on the residential lot line. That fence and those trucks and cars are 15 feet from my deck and right next to my backyard. I have measured that. I went out and actually measured all those distances. So we're talking about a situation here where my outdoor living space is very much compromised and the value of my property is compromised. With regard to the fact whether it's a unique situation or not, I walked around to the 5 examples that were cited to me in the denial. I looked at all of them, I took pictures of all of them, and I submitted those pictures along with their location on a zoning map, and I think you have that information there. None of these properties that were cited are comparable to my situation. None of them have a commercial parking lot in a B1 zoning district right next to a residence in the R2 NC zoning area. There are also in some of the examples, there was no parking lot at all. In several of the examples, there was no interface between a commercial parking lot and a private residence. And in a couple of the examples, all the properties in the immediate surround were already in the B1 zoning district, including the Nancy Hammond area, where there are several properties altogether that are in the commercial zoning district. Behind the parking lot there is about a 15-foot buffer of land with some bushes, and then there is another street, and then there is the next residential property. So we're talking about nothing similar to my situation. Finally, sort of in summary here, I would say that the current situation impacts my ability to enjoy my property, and it lowers the value of my property. The height of the vehicles that are parked next to that fence exceed the height of the current 6-foot fence by at least 2, if not 3 feet. By permitting the construction of a fence with a 2-foot more height over that back area of the fence, that would go a long way toward mitigating the problem. The owner of the abutting property, and he has given me permission to speak for him with this situation, so we are in total agreement on this. Having a slightly higher fence would allow him full use of his parking lot and would allow me to have a more peaceful and beautiful backyard. So it's kind of a win-win thing. We can add a little bit to that fence, we basically resolve the situation. I can think of no other solution which would go as far toward mitigating the situation as easily as this would.
All right, thank you. Questions?
Mr. Chairman, I live on Burnside, and I walk my dogs by this property twice a day. So I'm very familiar with this fence. She is correct. It is in the back half. You can barely notice it. She is also correct, Mr. Chairman, that these very tall trucks, I have noticed them. The parking lot used to be not very heavily used. It now has a new lessee, I assume, or owner, and there is a lot more traffic in that parking lot, and they park right up against that fence. Tall vans, tall pickup trucks. I would urge the board to allow the appellant to build a higher fence.
Are we deliberating or just commenting? Where are
Well,
we?
let's see if anybody. Michael, you have any questions?
No, Bob, not at the moment, thanks.
All right. Gentlemen? Counsel? These appeals are difficult. The burden is on you to demonstrate that the director has made serious mistakes, exceeded his discretion, violated the law or something on that order. That's a tough burden to carry. Certainly your presentation is a compelling one. And I think you can even sense in the candor from the representatives of the city that there's not a great deal of commitment to this. If the city was willing to sit down and try to work something out with you, and we'll just put this appeal on hold till the next meeting, see if you can work something out so we don't have to make that hard decision, would that be agreeable to you?
Okay, so what I say, I didn't completely understand what I hear what he said.
He was asking if you'd be willing to meet with the city and the department to see if we can come to a resolution amongst ourselves.
Yeah. Yes.
That's agreeable.
Yes.
I'm sorry, what's-
I would ask, please, that we move this along fairly quickly. We've been kind of trying to get this fence replaced for quite a long time, and if we could do it before summer season, we could do landscaping and so forth. So
I think that can
Yes.
happen.
a month or so would be fine.
And I should have asked you before, would you state for the record your name and address?
Administer the oath.
So what else? Does he?
Your name and your,
You do the
Okay. You just want me to say it? Sandra Rosswork, 511 Chesapeake Avenue, Annapolis, Maryland, 21403.
Thank you, Ms. Rosswork. Is that agreeable to the director?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it sure is.
Great. Thank you all. So we'll continue this until the April meeting if it isn't resolved before then.
email you.
All right.
Email address.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you very much, Mrs.
Thank you.
Rosswork.
Thank you.
This is your email, right?
Yes.
And that's your phone number?
Yes.
Do you check your email?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll shoot you an email and then we can figure out a time and a date that we can all meet.
Okay.
That
Can
work?
you put your name on here?
Sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chairman, with regard to the next agenda item, I am recusing myself, so I will leave the,
Regrettably, we,
I guess when you say
Defer
the wall,
your
you mean just
decision.
me and then you guys?
Thank
It'll be
you.
me and I don't know if you,
Okay.
with someone else.
Okay. Do I need to have the fence designer there or anything? I guess not. He can
Do you
do-
need what?
I guess he can do whatever. we decide.
Well, I mean, if you want his input, the person who's going to do the fence, I want to have them there if you find that's useful, or it's not necessary.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
that one had two numbers, fence number and a zone number. All right. Have we saved room for Mr. Fulton?
We have enough chairs, I think.
Well, the city will let you sit next to them.
I'll let you sit next to me too. I mean, I like Jessica. Let him help.
No, they're making. Sorry. Maybe. That works. If it seems simple enough to you. You laugh. All right. Our last case for the evening, saving the best for last, is Appeal 24002 relating to 518 6th Street, that hotbed of appeals. Ms. Lawrence et al. Against the director, an appeal from a decision by the director relating to the director's approval of a site design plan for permitting construction of a single-family residence and garage at 518 6th Street. Tonight, after several nights of going through the record and figuring out what the record is, trying to narrow the issues, we come to final argument. The order provided in our rules is the director goes first, the appellant second, the applicant third. Cross-examination will be as brief as you can make it. Or reply arguments will be as brief as you can make them, if we need them at all. So, board members and council, this is a pretty complicated case. Interrupt if you feel like you need to. I'm going to try to hold mine until the end, but if you need to interrupt, please do that. So we'll start with the director.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to do this. I just want to ask if we have any additional issues with exhibits submitted, should we resolve those during our arguments or should we resolve them right now and just get all the exhibits introduced?
There's already a record of what constitutes the record. If you want to offer exhibits that are not part of the record, you should point out that you're doing it.
I'm sorry, I don't intend to do that, sir. The board heard and agreed with various objections by opposing counsel. We have numbered exhibits. I wanted to introduce them only for identification purposes so that we had it for the record. But appellants have an objection to one of the exhibits submitted by the director. I just didn't know if we should do it in advance or not. No, not by the director. I'm sorry, by the applicant. I'm sorry.
Well, do that when he makes his,
Okay.
when you make your,
Okay.
Jessica, please.
Thank you. I'm going to have Chris, the director, provide the arguments for our case today.
Interesting. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and the members of the board. I'm actually very glad to be here this evening on this particular case. Our department approved a plan, actually approved two plans, an original plan and a revised plan, and issued building permits. And
How many directors ago was that it started?
there have been 6 directors since this project first was initiated. So I'm certain that the board members will keep that in mind when they read the brief of the appellants, which can be a bit tough on the directors on a personal level. So, but I've had a time to spend with our staff to read the record, to apply my own knowledge of the case, knowledge of planning and zoning, and to the facts. And we issued a permit, and we're standing by it. And we'd ask the board to find in favor of the director on this matter. I'm going to take you through my brief. My assumption is that the members have read the brief, so I'm going to give a very brief overview of the brief and hit on several points and support your decision making, and to the extent that you allow me. And I'm here to answer any questions too. This case is about a bulk modification or bulk modifications to an approved plan. In 2021, the Department of Planning and Zoning approved a house plan at 518 6th Street. And the department then began the process of reviewing permit drawings for a building permit. It ultimately approved the building permit and issued that permit. And then the applicant, over a period of time, began to seek revisions to the approved permit drawings. This happens quite frequently. This is not unusual. And this initiated a collaborative approach principally between the building plans reviewer, and you note in the record of my brief that his name is Ryan Bromley, and the applicant, the applicant's architects. During that period of back and forth reviewing the building plans, Mr. Tom Smith, who was until recent retirement, our chief of current planning, he was reviewing the plans for zoning compliance. So while the authority really rested with the building official and under Title 27 of the building code, we had a role to play from a zoning standpoint, making sure that the revisions, for instance, didn't exceed what was allowed by the code, by the zoning code. So again, this is about bulk modifications to an approved set of plans. And the zoning code gives the department the authority to approve minor modifications. The department in this case approved the minor modifications, and they were reflected in the 2020 plan. the authority for minor modifications is set forth in Title
Did you mean the
21.
2023 plan?
Yeah, the 2023 plan was the plan that reflected the
I think you
revisions.
said 2020.
Okay, my apologies. In short, if the modifications are in compliance, otherwise in compliance with the zoning code, if they don't allow a building to get encroach closer to a property line, if they are determined not to have an adverse impact on adjoining property owners, or have an adverse impact on the integrity of the project that was approved originally, the director can approve these minor modifications. In this case, the minor modification there was twofold. First was a bulk change to the third floor attic of the house. Again, the project was approved and permitted already. The revision did allow a expansion of the third floor. And as you saw in my brief, the roof of the third floor flattened. The side walls supporting that roof were raised, and the building on the third floor extended out about 1.5 feet. In total, about 90-some square feet of floor area were added through these various changes. The volume within the under roof changed too, but the actual square footage added was fairly small. I included a illustration of the renderings from the approved plan, the original approved plan, and the revised plans. It's in the exhibit. Of course, the applicants have included those too, and as well as the appellants. If you look closely at them, you can see the changes that were made. But you do have to look closely. The changes were made to the rear of the structure and are generally quite modest. The mass of the structure hasn't changed. The expression of that mass has changed somewhat. There's less roof, for instance, exposed, and more side wall. And again, we're just talking about the third floor attic in the rear of the property. The impact was, there was no impact. It was certainly no adverse impact per the code. It didn't place the building closer to any side yard. It didn't violate or run afoul of any other zoning standard or dimensional requirement in the zoning code. And for these reasons, the change was deemed modest or minor and rightfully approved by the department. Now, there is a interesting quirk in this case, and that involves what is called the 3250 rule, which is a rule that applies just to the zoning district in Eastport, the R2 and C district, principally to the R2 and C district, which means that what it says is that if a building plan or proposal is such that it exceeds 33,250 square feet in area, the building plan should be submitted to the Planning Commission for a public hearing and a decision. In other words, the matter is deferred or referred to the Planning Commission. But it's important to make a distinction about what is included and what is counted in the 3250 standard. These are zoning standards, so sometimes what appears to be logical and commonsensical is not always the case, because in this case, 3250 is meant to deal with bulk and mass of the structure. The things that are excluded from the count of 3250 include basements, accessory structures, and attic space, which is looking for the technical term here. uninhabitable. If attic space is uninhabitable, is determined to be uninhabitable, then it is not counted towards the 3250 limit. And in this case, the space that was added in the third floor was deemed to be uninhabitable. And why is that the case? Well, the space was under 7 foot ceiling. The space was under a ceiling of 7 feet tall. Excuse me, the ceiling over that space was less than 7 feet tall. And that's the threshold for determining whether something is habitable or not. Yes. Well, as it turns out, it's two things. It's both, or all three. City Zoning Code, Title 21, has a definition of habitable space. And I'm going to.
Do you have any, do you have anything to submit into evidence to support or collaborate that under 7 feet?
Yes. In fact, Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter into the record definition from the zoning ordinance. I will also, at perhaps the same time, enter into the record section R3051 of the ICC International Residential Code, which is I've referenced in my brief. Yes. Is that
Where's the definition of habitable that you rely on?
it's in the definition section of 21, so it'd be chapter 21.72, and it's in the definition of the word story half or half story. If you go to S for story, you'll see it there. And you'll see an illustration too that reflects how half story is a relevant factor in the determination of, in the review of third floor attic spaces.
Let me catch up with here. 2172.
The only reason question,
Okay.
and that is a trap question. How useful footage requires contract to know the difference between 7 space and not.
Right.
Fighting you that code.
Yes. Thank you.
2172.
Sorry, Mike.
Okay. So am I looking under habitable? Looking for habitable?
Now, look for the word story, comma, half.
Someone must have been paid by the word to write this definition section. Right, we're in the S's. Getting close.
Are you looking at city?
Yeah. Story half. Half story means a story containing habitable living space not exceeding 50% of the floor area next below. Habitable living space that meets the ceiling requirements for habitable rooms, hallways, corridors, bathrooms. Okay, all right. to save me the trouble.
Okay. So definition says habitable living space is space that meets the ceiling requirements for habitable rooms, hallways, corridors, bathrooms, toilet rooms, and laundry rooms as set forth in the City of Annapolis Building Code, Chapter 1712. And if you know Chapter 1712, that's the section of the City Code that references the building codes. And if you go to the building codes which the city has adopted, you'll see section R305, ceiling height. And that says habitable space, hallways and portions of basements containing these spaces shall have a ceiling height of not less than 7 feet. So that's the connection to the 7 feet. The zoning code references it, references the building code, and the building code provides the standard. Why this is relevant is that, and the record will show in the e-tracket comments between the comments provided by the building code reviewer, Mr. Bromley, and the zoning compliance review provided by Tom Smith, that this issue was relevant. They had said on a number of occasions, essentially, paraphrasing, you could read the comments, and I could go through a number of them as an example. They were saying, be warned, if your space exceeds, or if the ceiling is over 7 feet and the space is determined to be habitable, it will be counted towards the 3250 rule. Or conversely, if it's not considered habitable by the building code reviewer, it will not be counted as towards a 3250 rule. And the reason this was important to be established through the review process is that the project had already got up to the 3250 number. It was approved originally at 3250. In fact, it was approved just over 3250, and I'll explain what the actual number was. So when the plan was originally approved, it was approved at 20 feet over 3,250. That wasn't appealed then. Could have been appealed, but it wasn't appealed. So when the revision came in, the revision didn't change the square footage, didn't expand the square footage. It did add floor area to the third floor, but that floor area was determined to be uninhabitable because of the building code standards.
So let me stop you there. So it went out 1.5 feet farther toward the back.
Yes.
And all of that was under 7 feet. It seems to me from the drawings, the center of it still had more than 7 feet.
No, you might think that, but the way it was framed out, it was the maximum height was of the ceiling was 6 feet 10 inches.
What a coincidence.
Well, I mean that just shows like the interface between the job that the Title 17 reviewer has and what you're actually asked to review, which is a modification. And as I said, the modification was deemed by our staff consistently as being minor.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
The square footage, as I mentioned, was 20 feet over 3250. So it provided that the square footage of the building was 3278. That was the measurement of the original floor plates of the first and second floor, the sum of those with the original plan. Now the appellants will say the architect's drawings showed a number of different area computations for the floor area over time, and they changed. They made very well, and the architects could have been measuring something entirely different. They could have been subtracting from their total the elevator shaft, the void space, or the voided area above a stairwell, the areas that are not floor area. That's what they did. But we presume that Mr. Smith made a determination that the floor plates were actually right on the money, 3250 with slightly over. 28 feet is less than 0.9%. It's de minimis, and it's quite reasonable that using the discretion that the director had at the time, that he accepted it as a minor change that had there was no public interest in actually requiring a change to resize to that level. But in any case, that was part of the original approval. It wasn't appealed. The project went forward, and we're here today. The other modification of concern in this case was the modification to the garage. That modification involved essentially filling in various notches that were cut out of a more interesting design garage and making it more of a uniform rectangle, roughly about 56 square feet. This did not constitute a major modification. It was a reasonable minor modification, and again, it met the standards for granting a minor modification that are set forth in the code. The applicants the applicant also at that time of submitting the revised plan apparently moved the building, the garage building, 1 foot closer to the lot line, and still within the allowable setback, but did move it 1 foot closer. Now, you might conclude that that is not allowed by the zoning code. Maybe, maybe not. But it was approved to be 1 foot closer to the lot line, so that it's now 5 feet rather than, it's 6 feet rather than the original approved 7 feet. So and I offered a suggestion as a remedy on that particular matter if the board felt compelled to address that as an issue, that the board could actually approve the revised garage or confirm the approval of the revised garage, but make sure that it complies with the original setback area. Again, it's the garage is not placed within any required yard, side yard. It's simply 1 foot closer than shown on the original plan.
Has the slab been poured and framed in the garage?
The garage has not been built, no. The applicants also suggest, or the appellants, that the staff, the department, the director made errors in administering the code that deals with how much an accessory structure can occupy in the rear yard. The code provides that a shed or garage can occupy up to 50% of a required rear yard. I don't know that we need to spend much time on this particular issue. The rear yard, technically speaking, is 1,500 square feet, and the applicants are well under the allowable coverage. Only a small portion of their garage, roughly 450 square feet, the numbers are detailed in the report, encroaches within the rear yard. They're well under the allowable lot coverage.
I think you're going to hear from Mr. Gill that they have a different way of calculating the required yard. Maybe you can respond to that after.
Yeah, and I would just say in the outset, if their way is found to be viable, perhaps they could petition to the city council and have the code change, because this is the way the code is administered, and it's not unique to Annapolis. It's a common code provision that shows up in many municipal zoning codes. So on that, we just have a different point of view about.
Do you want to touch on the height, the building height?
Building height didn't change. There's nothing to say about it. It's not really subject to this appeal. In fact, the modification to the rear didn't change the height at all. It's the same height as the approved. The only thing that one thing that I guess I will comment on is while no modifications were made to or proposed to the bathroom or the hallway on the third floor, and there's a small hallway and a small bathroom totaling just over 100 square feet. During the final review of the plan, the architectural plan reviewer saw that and decided it should have a 7-foot tall ceiling. Something that was not required at the original plan review. But the modification that drove the changes was unrelated to this regulatory decision. It's like the building plan reviewer reviewing a plan and deciding that a window should be elevated higher from the floor in a space. He sees it when he has a second chance to review it, and he decides to make that change or to require it. And that's what this is equivalent to. And so I wanted to put that out there but if you added that 100 square feet to the 3250, you'd be over the 3250 rule, right? But this didn't come about through the modification or any structure or even a proposal by the applicant. What this did come about from is the decision by the architectural plan reviewer at the very end of the process in August of 2023 to allow the building or to apply that particular standard to the code or to the project. The difference is that the interior of the building was framed differently. So rather than being framed at 6 foot 10 inches, it would be framed 7 feet. And we're talking about 2 inches. It's not reflected or expressed on the outside of the building. It's entirely contained within the inside. It was not a result or derivative of any of the modifications that prompted the review in the first place or prompted this appeal. So it's not even subject to this particular hearing.
But isn't it a fact that the November 23rd review approved plans that had been changed, including the bathroom, that resulted in the approval of a structure that exceeded the 3250?
It is true that the plans were changed, but the plans that the changes didn't change the square footage or the height. It was not the plans that were changed. It was the architectural reviewer deciding I should go back and make that
But that was reflected in the drawings that were approved.
Yes, it was.
The alternative approach would have been to deny the bathroom and leave it 6 foot 8. So you cannot have a bathroom there because you do not have the square footage for a bathroom. That would have also been a perfectly appropriate response.
Yeah. And again, all those responses are perfectly reasonable, but they're reasonable within the context of what the building code reviewer does, which is not subject to the zoning board of appeals. In our view, that is the subject of the building board of appeals. And it's not as if the building around the bathroom got bigger. It was bigger, made bigger, or a bathroom was added as part of the modification. It's not the case. It is the case that when given the chance to fix something, the building plans reviewer did it.
But by that measure, why not just raise the whole third floor 2 inches so that it's all habitable space?
Well, not all of it could be raised because the slope roof was
The
quite
portion that could, why not be honest, raise it to 2 inches so that you can come in front of us and say, I need 4,000 or whatever it works.
Right. Well, it was a determination made by the building plans reviewer that the space was not considered habitable. And our zoning code connects us to that determination. And you can see throughout the comments, if the zoning compliance review said repeatedly, if the building plans reviewer determines that the space is 7 foot tall and is habitable, it will be counted towards
So
the 32
habitable
feet.
for this board, the purpose of our work here, habitable has nothing to do with whether it's usable. Okay? To be clear, habitable means simply a definition by which measurements are determined and applied. Is that the sole definition for our purpose?
It is, and it's set forth right in those exhibits I provided you. It's a technical definition.
Because all across the land there are countless basements below 7 feet that are playrooms, laundry rooms, which are all by code, not code, but by definition, not habitable. But by right, they are usable.
Yeah.
Is that am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, that's right.
So some of the floor area in the attic is 7 feet or better.
Some is a small part, 100 square feet.
But the rest of it is less and uninhabitable.
Yes.
But you don't have any question in your mind that all of that space is intended to be inhabited, do you?
It very well may.
You wouldn't need a bathroom. You wouldn't need a balcony.
I think that goes to the definition, habitable
right.
and usable.
And this, and the city council adopted this code. I mean, the code describes what habitable space is and what's to be uninhabitable by extension. So the staff has administered the code through this multiple year process with the applicant.
And
we
it has
arrived at this
evolved.
point.
It used to be 4 feet, then it raised to 5, and with regard to the minimum angle where the vertical wall meets the slope wall. It used to be 4 feet was the minimum. Maybe less. Now they've pushed that. You may not extend a usable space or habitable to where ceiling is less than 5 feet. The slope.
Is it required to be sprinklered? The attic?
A big share of that is, yes. Yeah.
You can see why the public might be a little frustrated at the way.
But I think we have to be careful. I don't want to start
Yeah, no,
deliberation.
I agree.
But everybody who has an objection to this conflicting definition of usable and habitable better soul search their own house for any
Yeah, I
little
know.
closet or low-hanging room that may not be, if they were denied the use of, that would be a slippery slope.
Yep.
But I do share your concern, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I understand how people would feel about this, but it is the code, and it was faithfully administered by the staff over a period of many years with the applicant, and ended up with an initial permit approval, authorization for construction, and revisions were approved as well.
Do we have any other questions before we move on to Mr. Giel? We're good?
We'll delay it a moment. My computer's moving slowly, so ask him a question. I'll filibuster for a moment. The first thing that I'd like to address here is in regards to exhibits, which I think we can possibly speed the process along by allowing exhibits that have not had objections to them be admitted into the record, and then the exhibits that were previously stricken by the board be admitted only for identification purposes.
Right.
And that way we don't have to change the numbers. So that being said, my understanding from the board's previous ruling on February 4th, was that Exhibit 1 would be stricken from the record, Appellant's Exhibit 1. Exhibit 8, 9, 11, 12, and 13.
I can't confirm or deny that. I don't have that.
I'll proffer that these are the arguments put forward by counsel in their briefs opposing my request. So yes, sure. 1, 8, 9, 11, 12, and 13. Okay. We don't intend to relitigate that. I'm just noting that those ones we're admitting for identification purposes only. I have no intention of talking about them tonight, really.
Fine.
Exhibits 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 14, and 15, I would like to move into evidence. On top of that, since I determined that it would be useful for the board to have an additional visual, what's the word for it? Visual aid. Just by excerpting a portion of the 2021 and 2023 records, I printed out several copies of these. And
What we're going to admit as exhibit are what was in these folders.
correct, minus the ones that we, of course,
Yeah.
are not admitting. So, 1, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, not admitted. Those, what I'm showing to council and what I will give to the board, if there's no objection from council, are pages, particularly page 2 of the 2021 site plan that details the square footage calculations, and page 2 and 3 of, page 2 and 3 of the 2021 plan, and page 2 of the 2023 plan.
These, you're objecting to these, or you're?
I'm not objecting. I'm going to introduce them into evidence. They're already in the record, and they were also in opposing counsel's
Well,
opening
let's
regis-
not clutter the record any.
Well, I guess I could refer to the record generally. I just
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yeah.
This is an appeal. The record is the record. We can just refer, if this helps you, just refer to the items that we all agree are in the record.
Yeah. If
I have no
I
problem.
don't think there's that many documents that
yeah,
we're going to
if
be
it's in one
referring.
of those things, refer to it.
Yeah, the only reason I say this is because I would,
Can't you refer to it by the number that's in here? Yeah, fine,
Yeah, they're all numbered.
fine.
I'm just telling you. Yeah. Those are 2023 site plans. I'm sorry, I'm not near a microphone. All right. With everything admitted, I also, before I begin, want to ask the board again if we should deal with an objection that I have preemptively to one of the exhibits produced by opposing counsel, or if I only object after.
What is it?
Exhibit G was an exhibit produced that is a draft ordinance. I think consistent with the board's ruling in the February 4th hearing. This isn't part of the record. This is, I mean, I'm not objecting to the accuracy of this document. I just don't think that it's part of the record.
This is exhibit 6 in this.
Exhibit G.
Number 7. Tab 7.
Exhibit G to the applicant's brief. It's just a copy of the legislation 03419. If it's included or not included in the record, it really doesn't matter to me. It's a piece of public legislation.
This regardless.
Yes, that's the one. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue it as a public record.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I'm just saying that I don't think that it should be part of the administrative record. I have no issue with it as a general document.
All right.
All right.
Let's get to the meat.
Let's get to the meat. And I think, the director here said some things that I agree with, and I think that it provides us with relief. I think that the way that he described it was a little bit contrary to what actually was in these documents. But I trust that the board reviewed our briefs as well. I'm not going to belabor the point more than I usually do. And I don't intend to argue anything tonight with regards to building massing, which I believe is something that the board decided would not hear arguments on. So my focus tonight is on the portions of the opening brief related to the square footage of the main building, the square footage and location of the garage, and the other general additions to the revised plan, such as the patios and the change of the driveway. When this application was submitted in 2021, and I hear now on the 2-minute to midnight timer regarding the director's argument, and apparently they admit was in excess of the 3,250 rule and should have had a public hearing. It did not have such a hearing. I don't believe that that is what the director's position had been until this argument at this evening. I think, consistent with the documents that I presented to you, that what the director and the applicant were relying on were these little square footage blocks that were added to these plans. And in the 2021 plan, the first floor was identified as having 1,520 square feet. The second floor was identified as having 1,471 square feet. And the attic, which is not on this document, but it is in the site plan generally, was identified as having 200 square feet. And there's a bit of a red herring here in my mind with regards to what is habitable or not. I don't think that that's a relevant question here. I don't think that you have to reach any decision whatsoever as to what constitutes habitability to afford us with relief. I think that that document there and the way that was calculated got the applicant to a number of 3,191 square feet. That was how it was added up. That was how it was moved forward. And because of those numbers that were placed there, everyone in DPZ acted as though they didn't need to have any sort of public meeting, and the public didn't have any expectation themselves of having it. They didn't push for this because the document, as stated, until further scrutiny became necessary, thought, well, this is 3,191. We don't need to go into the question of whether or not this exceeds that threshold. Now I hear that they say that it's 3,271. I believe that is what the director said a moment ago. I think that's the number. I don't believe that either of those numbers are accurate. And we will point out in our exhibit, let me see here, the exhibit 6, where in the second plan, the member of the DPZ staff, it's not identified who, but somebody in DPZ wrote handwritten calculations to determine the square footage of the basement. And one will note, even in my argument, that the square footage between the floors is not exactly the same. You'll see in the various plans that there are obviously different markings on the sides of these floors that show 6 foot here, 7.5 foot here, 19 feet here, random numbers. But it is broadly the same. The full length in all of the plans is identified as 61 feet, 1.5 inches. And the basement and first floor plans of the 2021 plan and the basement of the 2023 plan are also identify 27 foot 6 inches for the width. Now, there is a slight discrepancy between what I'm going to provide as a broad thought for you to consider and the actual exact numbers. I don't believe that it's going to be relevant either, because even at the most charitable interpretation for the applicant, they way blew past this threshold. Even at 27 feet and 6 inches, in the back, the building is constructed in such a way that it extends out very slightly and kind of does a little bit of a triangular formation, pyramid, if you will. And the calculations presented in Exhibit 6 show a slightly better exact calculation with these 4 main squared rectangular collections of spaces that they had calculated to be 1,639 square feet in the basement. The plans for both the original and the amended plan, the revised plan, don't have that exact measurement for these little triangular areas. So we're really only looking at the most narrow conception and assuming that the building doesn't extend very slightly outward. A 4th grader could calculate this if they were to learn length plus width. In the 2021 plan for the first floor, which was identified on this plan as 1,520 square feet, it had 65 feet, 1.5 inches, 65.125 or 1/8 of a foot. And then it had 28 feet on the width as opposed to 27 feet, 6 inches, which actually you would hear the director say that the 2023 plan actually expanded the building slightly. the 2021 plan suggests that actually, as written there, it was slightly wider than what was in 2023. But we have 28 feet on the top, 65, 1.5 on the length. Multiplication of these two areas is 1,820 square feet. On the front bottom right of these portions of the plan, you'll see that there's a part of this roughly rectangle that gets cut out, where there's an entryway for the door, and there's a little patio area with a little rooftop. And that is identified in various documents as being anywhere between 10 foot 3 inches and 10 foot 6 inches. The 2023 plan identifies two separate sections on the first floor as being 5 foot 9 and 4 foot 9 as being the exact center between the door. In the 2021 plan, the basement shows the measurement as 10 foot 3. So my calculation was based on the 10 foot 6 as shown in the 2023 plan. 20 feet and 6 inches is the depth of that area that gets cut out. So we have another square rectangle, 20.5 feet by 10.5 feet. Multiplied, 215.25 square feet. We take 1820, we subtract it by 215, we get, in the 2021 plan, 1,604.75 square feet. That is the rough lowest average without these extra little increments in square footage that, as you'll see in Exhibit 6, staff included, which actually increases the total amount by about 30 feet. Again, 1,604.75 publicly stated as 1,520 in this box that nobody knows who created it, but it's there on the document. Second floor is identified as having 1,471 square feet. On the 2021 plan, impressively, it manages to extend 6 inches outward, which is again why I'm saying we're looking slightly amorphously at these measurements here. I don't think that the second floor was larger than the first. Buildings aren't usually constructed like that. And I don't think this one is either. But it's written as having 1,852 square feet. Minus 215.25 equals 1,636.25. Publicly identified as 1471. Then you have on this third floor with the 200 square feet at that point, and this argument of whether or not something should be calculated based on whether it's 7 or 6 foot 10. At the time, it's identified as 200. The actual square footage in the 2021 plan on the minimum end, using a simple length times width calculation, would be 3,441 square feet. We've repeated several times that as much as we would like to see full revisions of this, the first plan is set in stone. And we're not asking this board to reverse the first plan by virtue of legal error. But one legal error does not give carte blanche to extend further legal error. To the extent that the first plan either expanded past the 3,250-foot rule by 21 feet, as the director suggests here, or by roughly 200 feet, that is there. But the second plan goes in and adds extra square footage. The extra square footage described partially as being an extension in width and partially as being a recalculation of the building code as applied to bathroom areas to extend by 2 inches, so there would be more habitable area calculated on the attic. In any way, increase the number that DPZ was operating by. And I don't think that this board should entertain the notion that it doesn't have to listen to zoning code if building code said, oh, A over here, B over here. The two codes interlink. If a planner identifies that something needs to be changed in a plan that is changed and submitted accordingly, then the law should apply properly in that circumstance. They don't get the opportunity to continue onward with a new plan and new measurements and say, well, we were technically already breaking the law. We could break it a little more. It's not harming anybody. It's a bright line delineation. When you pass through this threshold in this district, regardless of whether or not somebody thinks it will harm neighbors or not, if it happens to be 20 square feet over, regardless of whether or not they think it's a 0.9% increase, they have to have that public hearing. People need to be made aware that the plan is being changed, and is being changed in a way that, according to the building code, it needed to increase in size, and according to the documents submitted, it did increase in size. Except the 2023 plan conveniently somehow decreases the threshold of this of the 2 floors down to 1,438 square feet each. Now, the length remained the same. The width, one could say, was decreased to 27.6 versus 28 based on this. Even in that circumstance, if you multiply 65 by 27.5, you get 1,787.5 square feet. Minus 215.25 gets you 1,572. Times 2, plus another, I guess it was, let's say it's not even changing the roof at all. And let's say we round it down slightly just to make it easier. We add just the 200 and we're now at 3,344. If we increase the height of the roof, which we have identified, I believe, in Exhibit 5, let me check for that. Yes, Exhibit 5 identifies the 2023 plan. They identify it as 340 square feet. We add another 140, and we're now at 3,484. Now, I don't think this board needs to listen to any specific calculation that I put forward. I think it only needs to notice that what was written as the actual measurements of this building and what one could calculate was demonstrably several hundred square feet different than what was identified in all 4 boxes of both the 2021 and the 2023 plan. And in all of these circumstances, it exceeded the 3,250 rule. If the 3,250 rule was nominally exceeded by 3,271, as the director suggests, it was exceeded more by virtue of the changes submitted by the applicant. Changes that the applicant is not entitled to as a matter of law if there needs to be a review of major modifications. Now, if this were a minor modification, if this were up to the discretion of the director, one could say, well, it's up to the discretion of the director. They didn't need to tell anybody. Except once you change the bulk regulations in this manner, once you exceed this threshold in this district, it is outside of the director's hands. The director has no authority to do this. 21-24-120 states that the director may approve planned development plans as follows. Minor modifications of the bulk of structures, provided that the modified dimensions comply with all requirements of the applicable zoning district and do not allow the buildings closer to property lines or otherwise adversely affect neighboring properties or the development authorized by the plan as originally approved. That second half I'll get to in a moment. The first half is clear. This violated a requirement. Whether or not the director thought that it was a requirement that didn't need to actually occur, or whether or not the public didn't comment the first time about the lack of a plan, or whether they even noticed the first time about the lack of a plan, it exceeded it the first time, or not until tonight, or it exceeded it and then exceeded it some more because they properly calculated something and then changed numbers in boxes to make it look as though they didn't have to redo those calculations. They were doing so pretty conspicuously to avoid this threshold and avoid this public plan. Because I think, based on what I'll say in a moment, that these extra additions of the patios and the garage changes would have been things that the public would have had a serious opposition to, just based on the general character of the neighborhood. But no public hearing occurred. No information was disseminated to anyone at any point until the building started. That's why we were here in the first place. That's why our appeal was conceptually late, because we couldn't have appealed it until we learned of the actual building construction, until after this.
We've been over all that.
Yes. So the appeal was taken at that point in time to identify these errors and to say you couldn't have submitted this plan as described without this public hearing. We needed to know about it. The director did not have that discretion. And these boxes that were being used for these square footage calculations were very obviously erroneous. And whether or not the director would have needed to rely on those boxes or not, I think is undermined by the fact that the actual comments by planning staff and the writings of planning staff would have put the director at the very least on constructive notice that there was something wrong with the calculations being submitted. Now, as a general matter of the record, I don't mean to call out the director. We made this mistake ourselves in one of our correspondences. The planner that was working on this is Blomley as opposed to Bromley, and I think we've all misspelled his name on occasion, but Mr. Blomley identified these errors. Where's my other? I'm escaping the other commenter's name. Give me a second. Smith, thank you, Thomas Smith. Mr. Smith also identified these issues. These issues were then handwritten onto these newly submitted plans and showed, at least with regards to the basement, which by all accounts appears to be the same square footage and same measurements of the other floors, that they were way, way in excess of what was being publicly stated in these boxes. And that the director looked at this and he said, we're going to let it go through. We think that was clear legal error. We think that was an abuse of discretion because it was clear legal error in a way that the director would have been able to identify based on what was actually in the documents in front of him. The second component of this regards to the garage. We have, in fact, a different opinion as to how accessory uses are calculated with regards to their required yards. And the city and the applicant have both forwarded this position that the required rear yard of a property is 30 feet out from the rear property line, which in this case would be 1,500 square feet. We read that provision of the code to state that that is the required rear yard for the actual principal building. But the accessory building, as we have identified in Exhibit 7, and then we wrote up additional markups in Exhibit 14, is not how, in principle, this has been calculated in DPZ. The accessory uses are identified based on their size and their setback requirements. The setback requirements are at the baseline 2 feet, and the increase in height and general massing of the accessory structure is such that if they are higher, they need to have a further setback. Pretty common provision in the zoning code. This garage was higher than usual, and it would have required extra 4 feet on both sides, extra 4 feet in the back for a 6-foot setback on all three areas. And the area that you would calculate for this yard would be the rear 25% of the full lot, which in this case is 160 feet, and therefore a 40-foot threshold, which is exactly where the garage lands on. The reason that this is done is because the 25% rule, as I'll call it, allows for some changes in setbacks for an accessory structure. So the accessory structure, the garage, was located at this point. The calculation of the area that one would want to look at is not the 1,500 yard, but rather 1,272 square feet, which is a measurement of 34 by 38. And the garage, as originally submitted, was nominally over that. And people didn't take an appeal to that, and therefore, theoretically, would be set in stone to be reversed. But the second portion of this review process, the revised plan, increased the building, moved it closer to the side, increased its square footage, changed the building to, I guess, a less interesting building shape based on what the director had stated, but increased the square footage to 792 square feet. And in accordance with the rule on setback and not setbacks, I'm sorry, moving closer to a property line in section 2124-120, you cannot move a building, accessory or principal, closer to property lines in a minor modification process, nor can you exceed the 50% threshold for the yard. So we argue...
There isn't a building yet.
There isn't a building yet. We hope that the board would rule in our favor and tell the applicant to construct in accordance with the original building, and then the applicant saves some money without having to tear anything down. But the plan currently would allow the applicant to proceed with something that we believe is incorrect. So,
And what
I'm sorry, sir.
Aren't there 6-foot setbacks?
Yes, but the 6-foot setback, that is to calculate the size of the yard. The original garage was located at 7 feet. And even though we do believe that it could theoretically move to the 6-foot setback and maintain requirements for the setbacks, we're not saying any setbacks are being violated here. It would violate the provision of 2124-120 that states that a building cannot move closer to a property line in a minor modification process. If a property line, if the distance between a building and a property line changes and gets closer, it becomes a major modification. It can't be approved.
I'm having trouble with the idea that you're moving a building closer to the property line when it hasn't been built.
Oh, sure. But the first one is designed and the plan is identified as showing it at 7 feet.
Yeah, I get that.
The current one identifies it as being at 6 feet. If it were to be constructed, it would be moved closer. Yeah, I believe so. Yes, minor modifications of the bulk of structures, provided that, and I'm adding the 1, 2, 3 here. 1, the modified dimensions comply with all requirements of the applicable zoning district. 2, and do not allow buildings closer to property lines. And 3, or otherwise adversely affect neighboring properties. I think number 2 is clear there with regards to the moving of the actual structure itself. And really, it's more of an expansion. The westward side of the garage isn't shifting. It's that the eastward side is expanding outward to get closer to the property line. So there are 2 arguments we put forward there. 1, it's too large with regards to the required yard. 2, it's too close. I'm sorry, sir. I could.
Things that are within our discretion, we could demand they build it originally,
Yes.
deny the minor modification, make them get a new permit for that garage, which they would get because it's within 6 feet.
Yes.
I just want to, okay.
Yeah, the first plan, they could move forward with that. And I think that segues into my third point with regards to the other general changes. The applicant could have moved forward with this 2021 plan and built everything. They didn't need to make changes. Now, yes, minor modifications occur regularly in this city. And the director is correct in saying that people reach out regularly to make those changes. But minor modifications are not intended to circumvent the review process and add on meaningful structures. And the first part of 2124-120A states that the minor modifications are allowed for the size and location of drainage ways, sewers, roadways, landscape elements, or similar features in light of technical or engineering considerations. That is the first concept of a minor modification. I'm not saying they violated that provision here. We're not talking about sewerage. I'm saying that the idea of a minor modification is that it is something that, for technical reasons, and you can see in the third portion there, modifications for conditions imposed on a plan development. The reason the minor modifications exist is to provide a little bit of lubricant. A circumstance where maybe somebody overlooked a measurement of a limit of disturbance or the measurement of a sewerage line, and they need to change it, and they don't want to go through the entire process again. That's what it's generally intended for. And minor changes to the bulk of structures provided in this district, they don't exceed 3250, can also theoretically be approved. Now, bulk is not calculated for a residential building with regards to things like driveways and patios. It's not taken into account for the square footage. But I would present to this board that it's also not minor. When you have a building, and that building is a front facing, and that building has a general silhouette, has a general angle of the height of the building, awning of the building is what I want to say. But it has a general structure that a person looks at from the road. It has a general plan as to where the driveway should go. It has a general plan as to what it's going to look like to the neighbors and whether or not it's going to fit into the general community aesthetically. You get that approval, and then you decide, well, I think I was probably going to get pushback if I asked for a full wraparound front balcony area or patio area, and I'm going to go ask the director to let me just expand this outward by couple hundred square feet across the full outer edge. And the director says, well, technically not a violation of the bulk requirements, so I'll give you your extra patios, I'll give you your extra balconies, I'll give you your changes to your driveway. go ahead. You can go ahead and move with it now. The plan as submitted didn't have public comment because the plan what I mean to say is the plan is submitted in 2021. Didn't have public comment because, as you might hear from during the public portion of this hearing, the neighbors didn't have an issue with the construction of the original building. They looked at that and they went, this seems fine. They would have had an issue with the new building, with the new patio, and with the new balconies, and with the new driveway. It doesn't fit into the character of the surroundings. And they would have wanted to be able to comment on that. This wouldn't have simply been a procedural public hearing. People would have shown up had a public hearing been scheduled because they would have seen these new changes. And we think that on top of the relief requested for the square footage of the building, the square footage / location of the garage, we should also be entitled to full relief of a reversion to the 2021 plan because these other structures that were added, that you can see in our other submitted exhibits, that is the, where is it? I want to make sure I give you the right number. Sorry for the pause here. My computer's been having issues with my PDF viewer. You'll be able to see it in the exhibits. They're not particularly large. We have a submission that shows the changes, the visual aesthetic changes between the 2021 and 2023 plan. That shows the changes with the balconies, shows the changes with the patio. We think that these should also be reverted. We think that the determination as to whether or not there would have been an adverse effect on the neighborhood would have been determined, or at least would have been heard properly with a public hearing that the neighbors didn't have the chance to participate in. I think I'm probably talking too much, and I think that I can rest there. That is a summary of our case. We have the written opening and reply briefs as well. In summary, too large, much larger than was ever identified in the documents, larger than what was approved in 2021. Too large for the garage, too close to the property line, and other changes would have been commented on generally by the public had a hearing occurred. We therefore ask this board to grant relief in the favor of reverting the construction to the 2021 approved plans, or other such relief as it may deem necessary. Thank you.
Questions before we move on to Mr. Fulton?
Hi. For your purpose of calculating the square footage, what methodology did you use? I heard you must have said about 600 numbers.
Yes, surely. We have. I tried to make this as simple as possible for the board because again, there's these little teeny ridges.
Just
that
how did you? What
I went
methodology?
length times width. That's
For every interior space or the exterior?
For the interior spaces. Okay. For the interior walls, as identified by the full length wall and the full width wall, and then I subtracted the portion that was cut out. Area of a square.
Is there a standard that you follow, the state of Maryland tax assessment for assessing square footage? What did you use? What standard did you?
Oh no, I presented those calculations to this board to identify to it that even if more exacting standards were applied, even if somebody were to write in the measurements as the planners did, and they would actually get a higher number than what I got, the minimum threshold of calculating a rectangle minus a smaller rectangle is length times width minus the length times width of the other. I didn't follow a specific standard. I'm not an engineer.
I don't want to answer for you, but you use the interior dimensions for each room individually and then sum them up.
No, I calculated the wall, the full walls of the building to the extent that square footage would be minorly impacted by the interior of a wall and the width of that wall. I did not present those numbers to you. Those numbers could nominally affect this by, 50 square feet, and we would still be 300 square feet off. I don't believe that the interior walls sum up to several hundred square feet worth of uncalculated space.
Same question to the director. What standard, and bearing in mind that your predecessor affirmed or calculated or accepted, or have you sensed this application appeal, thank you, was filed, have you gone back and reevaluated the square footage?
Yes, I looked at the measurements that Ryan Bromley had provided to the file, where he actually measured the walls exterior of the basement. He consolidated the square footage in the basement. That is the proper approach to establishing floor area for the purpose of the 3250 or other types of calculations that the zoning ordinance requires.
And for the record, so can we, the board, have what you believe to be the current minor adjustments square footage?
Yes, 1,638, the one that was presented by
the total.
Brian.
What do you think the total habitable square footage, bearing in mind the ICC definition of habitable,
Yes.
including the new 7-foot bathroom and 7-foot hallway?
I'll add this up myself, and I'm using Mr. Blomley's measurements because, again, the measurements I presented to you were as visual
I
aid.
would just like what you think the square footage
Yes,
is.
1639 for the first and second floor because they're the same general square footage as the basement. Times 2, that's 3,278. It exceeds 3,250 without the attic at all. Then the attic added 340 square feet in the revised plan for the increases in the habitable area. That goes to 3,618
So the
square feet.
348 is only the spaces that are 7 feet or greater.
That's the publicly identified little box for what DPZ calculated.
Well, I'm looking at the plans, and it clearly identifies where the ceiling heights are 6'8", and where they're 7'0".
Yes. What I'm saying is
your 348 including the 6'8", or everything on the
340, not 348.
Oh, sorry.
And I there is no exact measurement length and width written down by DPZ for that one. This one is the document presented in the 2023, the little boxes that they summed up. What they identified as 340 square feet. Now, in all the other boxes that they identified off to the side, they underestimated by a matter of several hundred feet. But the most charitable is the one that they provided on this document, the applicant themselves, which would be 340. I didn't calculate that.
Okay. And then,
And that, to me, my understanding,
the director has not answered what they think. So I have 1639 times 2 plus 340.
3,618 square feet.
33,618. No, sorry. What'd you say?
3,618.
3618. Okay. Mr. Director, what do you think?
The square footage is 3,378. It's 3,278 square feet in the 2 floor areas that were approved, and 100 square feet in the bathroom and hallway that were, through regulation, applied, made applicable to the 7-foot height.
3,278 plus 100.
I want to note one other thing, just generally, because I think that is important to note. I didn't intend to have any animus towards this specific director. When I refer to the director, I refer to the office of the director, and the calculations are for all
We
of the
understand.
predecessors.
Who could be mean to?
Thank you. Okay. That is all my only.
Mr. Chairman, may I just add, much of the testimony that was provided seems to be an attack on the architect itself and the architect's listing of numbers. And when he refers to the word they, it's not us. I want to be clear that they is not the Department of Planning and Zoning. We didn't put these numbers in boxes. The thing that we did was measure the floor plate of the basement. That's what we did.
If I may respond briefly to that, very briefly, I agree that that's the applicant that put the numbers forward, but the applicant argued themselves that the director was following with his discretion by relying on said numbers, and that he had no capacity otherwise to engage in different calculations.
Understand. Mr. Fulton, you've been very patient.
Although I do disagree with the square footage we arrive at. Mr. Hyman arrives at 3,216 square feet, which is below the 3250 rule. And at the end of my presentation here, I'll circle back as to exactly why. But before I do, I'd like to address a few procedural issues. In writing and just in passing here, the appellants seem to argue about irregularities or violations with respect to the patio and driveway. I don't know exactly what was noted in their notice of appeal. But
That's not in there, so you can, don't worry about it.
I appreciate it. I assume you know where I'm going with this, which is the items we're here to discuss are the items properly appealed, items properly noted, items properly before this board, items timely appealed, and I've made my point in writing, and I will leave it at that. I'm going to attack these, not attack. I'm going to address the what I deem to be the three major issues in this case in reverse. I'm not going to go with the square footage, and then the garage, and then the height of the house, even though it wasn't necessarily addressed in person here this evening. I'm going to start with the garage because I think it tells a story from Mr. Hyman that's not exactly clear to the folks on this board throughout this 6-month appeal. Now, the appellants argue that Mr. Hyman's proposed garage violates 213830 G2, which governs percentage of required yard. And that provision states no detached accessory building or buildings shall occupy more than 50% of the area of the required yard. Now, in the R2NC, a 30-foot rear yard is required for any property with a single-family dwelling. Of course, that is applied to lots with single-family dwellings. But conversely, it creates the yard. That yard is required. And most times, folks stick garages in the rear yard. So for this exercise, the rear yard is the required yard. And in the R2NC, that yard must be 30 feet. From there, the calculation is pretty simple. We've got a 30-foot required rear yard. We've got a 50-foot wide lot. And we've got a garage that I believe is about 792 square feet. The applicable zoning code states, and I believe it's 213830 G2, states that only 50% of that required rear yard can be occupied by a garage. As the director notes, this garage straddles that 30-foot line. It's not all in the 1,500 square feet. It's just over half, but for our purposes, I'll call it half. The exercise is over. It does not meet that 50-foot threshold. It's within it, and it complies. Appellants argue that the rear yard's not 30 feet. They say it's 40 feet. However, they rely entirely on a provision found at 2160-100. And here's what that provision states. It says, where specified in bulk regulation tables in Division 3 of this zoning code for a particular residential zoning district, an accessory building located in the rear 25% of a lot has a reduced interior side yard requirement. Now, the appellant's reliance on this particular provision, their reliance for this provision that Mr. Hyman's garage exceeds the allowable coverage is symbolic and representative of their arguments across this entire appeal. And really, to me, it's the theme of this whole appeal, which is to say nothing in 2661-110 states that the 25% area is the required yard for calculating the 50% accessory structure coverage limit under 213830 G2. It doesn't mention coverage. It doesn't mention required yards. It includes a handy little drawing of the items they are concerning, but that drawing too doesn't mention coverage. That drawing too does not mention any required yards. All that provision can reasonably be interpreted to mean is that with a 30-foot required rear yard, or any size rear yard for that matter, those who choose to push their accessory structures, i.e. their garages, far enough back to be entirely within this 25 area are afforded favorable and reduced side yard setbacks. That's it. In other words, appellants are desperate that the city code say and require things that patently are not there. Now, I'm not going to belabor the point or waste time trying to undermine the rest of their calculation because, frankly, I don't understand it, and this issue doesn't even get to that point. The fact of the matter is the formula or the equation that I just proffered, and it's the same one that the director has adopted, is simple, it's reasonable, and it doesn't rely on any inserted terms or giant leaps in interpretation in order to apply it. It is, by definition, not arbitrary or capricious. It's certainly not superficial. The applicant's interpretation is. Their interpretation, rather, relies on words that just don't exist in the code. So we rely on the words as they do exist in the code and reach a very simple determination here. We've got a garage that straddles the required setback, and by virtue of straddling it, does not come remotely close to the 50% threshold that's required in that rear yard setback. Now, this argument, and by this argument, I mean inserting terms into our city code which simply don't exist, is employed by the appellants, not only with respect to the garage, but also the height of the dwelling and the square footage issue that we have before us. Now, I recognize that the appellants haven't addressed the height of the dwelling issue here in person this evening, but they've belabored the point in their opening brief and every other opportunity they get. So I do feel compelled to at least address it because the argument is consistent here as it is in the garage issue as well as the square footage issue. So with respect to the height of the dwelling, the appellants ignore the fact that the height in the R2NC may be either 26 feet or the average height of the block face not to exceed 35 feet. They ignore that Mr. Hyman's architects submitted a calculation showing that the average dwelling height along the 6th Street block face is just over 31 feet, and they ignore that the proposed height of the dwelling, as the director correctly noted, remained at 30 feet across the original plan and the revised plan. Instead, they baldly state that the average height represented by Hyman is incorrect. They suggest that instead, they suggest that the director was supposed to essentially go out and measure all the heights along the 6th Street block face himself. That, however, like the garage issue, is not in the city code. The director had virtually no reason to believe that Mr. Hyman's calculations were incorrect. The calculations were prepared by a professional architect. They were submitted very early on in what was a site design plan process. Let's not forget that the original approvals were involved in a site design process. There was a posting requirement. These items were uploaded to track in 2019 and 2020. In other words, the appellants were on full notice that Mr. Hyman was developing a house, that he had calculated the average dwelling height across this 6th Street block face to be what it is, and they did nothing about it. They did absolutely nothing about it until 4 months after they filed this instant appeal. There's nothing remotely before this board that could possibly have driven the director to assume that the calculations that were submitted were wrong. He relied on what was properly before him, and by virtue of the fact that the height has not changed, this again is really not an issue, as Director G points out. And more to the point, and I think I'll touch on this in my last issue here, which is the square footage. If the director was required to go remeasure the height of every home along a city block face to ensure calculations down to the inch are correct, especially in light of the fact that he had no evidence to the contrary, I ask where it ends. I think that sort of standard or that sort of requirement ingrained in our city code is incredibly dangerous. And
your argument's not lost on us. We hear variance applications and make decisions based on certified drawing.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I'll say one more thing. It just, to expect these sorts of measurements to be doubly verified by the folks, the few folks, mind us, sitting in the Department of Planning and Zoning would bring this whole process to a screeching halt. And it would cause our city officials to do the work of the private professionals, that work which we are totally justified in relying upon. And yet the appellants offer this same argument with respect to the dwelling's square footage. And context on this issue, I think, is key. This was not some fresh new site design plan application. That application was made years ago and properly approved in 2021. The plans before this board right now are revised building permit drawings submitted for issuance of the permit to construct the dwelling. And as the director correctly again pointed out, minor modifications to these drawings are submitted in the normal course. They are almost always submitted. Now, by virtue of these being revised plans, they did include minor modifications to the pitch of the roof and a variety of exterior balconies, but that wasn't all. And as Director Jakubiak points out, there was also a change in the department's interpretation of existing habitable living area on the 3rd floor. And this is critical. I am not going to, again, belabor the point as to what constitutes habitable living area, but I will point out that there seems to be a difference in interpretation and a difference in application, and that's shown by virtue alone of Mr. Blomley's change in course when he said, all of a sudden, this needs to be included in this calculation. Now, the pitch of the roof, and I need to correct something in my written brief, the pitch of the roof may not have actually caused the increase in habitable area on the third floor. That increase, in all likelihood, was caused by, as I said, a change in interpretation by an individual in the Department of Planning and Zoning. What I find incredibly convenient here is that the appellants are okay with the director and the department's change in their interpretation of the city code when it causes the floor plan to increase, but not to decrease. And that's really where we wind up with this challenge against the numbers submitted by licensed architects on sealed submittals. In reality, the change in square footage was probably de minimis. But it's just as easily explained, and let me take a step back here. The calculation coming in under 3250 is just as easily explained by a different method of calculating the square footage on those two floors as the change in calculation employed by Mr. Bromley on the third floor. As the director pointed out, we're looking at a zoning calculation here. And sure, it gets a little fuzzy when you have someone in the building side of things looking at these numbers. But the fact is, invariably, these floors and these figures sometimes include stairwells. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they include elevators, and sometimes they don't. The fact of the matter is, when we had an increase on the third floor, it could have easily just as been the same that certain changes were accepted or certain methods were accepted by the planners in the Department of Planning and Zoning to take another look at the square footage at the first and second floor. They are very similar. Are they absolutely the same? I wouldn't testify to that, but they're clearly very similar. It's just as easily explained by, well, you know what, now that we're taking another look at this and we've decided to increase the square footage in the third floor, we won't count the stairwell because we usually don't. Or we won't count the elevator shaft because we usually don't. And seeing as though these two floors are, in fact, very similar, under this new methodology, they are the same square footage. The last thing I'll add here is this. When you walk down 6th Street, it does not take long to realize that there are a variety of old single-family homes which have been heavily backloaded with clearly recent renovations. I think it's incredibly clear that Mr. Hyman showed up to the Department of Planning and Zoning seeking to build a house just like all of his neighbors. And the criticism and the microscope that the appellants are asking us to review his plans through, I highly doubt these same appellants would be as receptive to very minor modifications being reviewed through those same lens. I fully expect them to disagree with me, but as a matter of practicality, that's just where our position is. In fact, I highly doubt these folks would have allowed Mr. Hyman or his architects to step onto their property and measure their height if they did challenge those calculations timely.
This is getting sort of far afield.
It is. But with that,
We don't need to assess the character of the appellant.
You're absolutely right, Mr. Chairman. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Hyman relied on professional architects to submit these plans, and he relied on the city to approve them. I think the city did nothing wrong in accepting meticulously reviewed, over the span of 4 years, I believe, architecture plans, which are easily explainable by a change in methodology, which I don't necessarily think requires to be included in this record. I think there's an argument before this board that every single tidbit of work product needs to be, and to that point, I think I'd venture down the argument from a previous hearing where the appellants wanted every email under the sun remotely related to this matter to be included in this record. I just don't go that far. I think there's a variety of decisions and actions that are taken by the folks in the Department of Planning and Zoning that might not wind up on eTracket, but might be very, very material to how these sorts of plans are accepted and approved. And in addition to the other parties, professionals, I think they do so rightly. And for that, we would ask that this appeal is denied and the building permit be issued.
Okay, thank you. More questions? Mr. Walsh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, so it's clear in my mind, if I might ask Mr. Jakubiec, having read his brief that he submitted about what is properly applied for the garage, can you just summarize that for me again? Because comparing that to the appellant's brief in that matter, I just want to make sure I have it clear in my mind why the section they're proposing is incorrectly being asserted.
You're referring to 21.60-100 rather than 21.50-50.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
So the 2122 110B is titled Modification to Allow Accessory Uses and Structures. They cite that as the provision for finding fault with the minor modifications. My response to that was, this is an existing approved plan. The garage exists on an approved plan. This is not about allowing an accessory use or structure. It's about a simple bulk modification to one that's been approved. After all, we're here to consider revisions to an approved plan. So I made a point of calling that out and saying that the proper standard is the same standard that would be applied to buildings generally. And that you look at, and in fact, I heard the appellant's architect or lawyer actually refer to the various subparts of the proper standard this evening.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Walsh?
I just want to make sure I'm having in the proper context that I can understand. And so your contention is that this is an already approved accessory structure and not one that would be interpreted as seeking allowance as an accessory structure.
That's right. Section 2122 110B says you can get modifications to allow accessory structures under certain circumstances. But this is not a case of allowing something. It's a case of modifying something that has already been allowed. Right.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That clarifies. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I could probably come up with a couple of questions.
Mr. Chairman, may I add one thing
Yeah.
to that discussion? Respectfully, I believe appellant's attorney was referencing chapter 2124 earlier for this very discussion. Mr. Walsh, I believe you meant 2122. 2124 deals with plan developments. It's an almost near identical set of provisions, but for everyone's clarity, I believe you meant 2122.
Well, yes, and I'd also note, if it helps the board at all, we did make an argument regarding notice generally in 2122 110B, which the city responded to by saying this isn't a new structure, it's a modification, we don't need to provide notice. We presented that. I don't believe that it's something that requires any particular relief, and we've talked at length about the procedure involving a notice. So, but yes, I don't have an opposition to appellant's.
Let me ask you
Appellee's statement.
Are you aware of any formal standards or best practices that zoning officials should apply when they're considering how much to rely on information provided by licensed professionals?
This is a question to me,
Yeah.
since you're looking at me. I don't have anything particularly in mind as to a certain best practice that I could present to you. I honestly didn't brief that. I think that the director's obligations under the code stand apart from documents submitted to him. He has an obligation to enforce the code regardless of what a developer would present to him in a document. But even if he looked at the documents as presented to him in this circumstance, I don't believe that it gets us over the finish line for the appellee. So regardless of the standard used for deference to
All right, no matter what the standard
engineer's
is,
sa-
he failed it.
yeah,
You
I
don't know
believe
what
so.
it is, but he failed it. Okay. Mr. Jakubiak, are you aware of any standards that are applied by zoning officials?
No, I'm not.
Mr. Chairman, can I make my point just real quick to Mr. Walsh? There's discussion about the provisions which are applicable to an accessory structure. And under 21-22-110, Part A addresses minor modifications. Within Part A, there's a Subpart 1 which contains the requirement that a minor modification not be nearer to a neighboring lot. However, under 21-22-110B, there's a separate group of provisions which regulates modifications to allow accessory uses and structures. This is separate from the minor modifications provision. And absent from this section is any requirement that an accessory use or structure not be permitted to go closer to a neighboring lot. It just doesn't exist. There's a perfectly sound argument to be made that the changes to this accessory structure, the garage, are not minor modifications. They're just modifications to an accessory structure, which does not carry with it the requirement that it not be moved closer to any neighboring lot line.
I don't want director's counsel to go home without having to work at all tonight, so I got a question. Are you aware of any authority for the proposition that the director may approve a plan that on its face allows a structure greater than 3250 without going back through the planning commission process? I understand the logic of your argument about the inspector told him to jack up the ceiling, but more generally, we were 20 feet over to begin with before we got to the third floor. Are you aware of any authority that says that's not a hard limit?
I'm not.
So, I mean, I keep coming back to the common sense approach. The ceiling wouldn't have been lowered, but for the purpose of making it uninhabitable. But it was clearly intended to be inhabited. Mr. Gill points to parts of the record that almost, I think he would say, suggest that the department suggested to the applicant that you could reduce your square foot problem by making that adjustment. And it's great that the department cooperates with people and works collaboratively to try to achieve their legal objectives. But there was no reason to flatten the roof other than to raise the wall height, was there?
I don't have the answer to that.
Why would you flatten the roof except to raise the wall? And then you realize that you've got a little problem, so you shim it out 2 inches or 4 inches.
Mr. Gallagher, may I add one more thing? And the folks here are more than welcome to respond. I think there's something to be said about the fact that there was some obvious discourse between the applicant and the department throughout all this,
Generally a good thing.
up until the point where this was approved. And I think it's an argument that the appellants, again, ably made 2 hearings ago to suggest that they want more documents to see if there's some smoking gun, but I don't think there's any entitlement to that smoking gun by virtue of the fact that we haven't seen the smoking gun. In other words, you can just as easily say they could not have possibly gone through this whole discourse only to get to a point in time where they go, it's going to be in violation, but we're going to approve it anyways. The discourse suggests the exact opposite.
Mr. Chair, may I do weigh in here? So, you're in this somewhere between a couple hundred and a few hundred square feet over, right?
Yes.
Would you further acknowledge that if the applicant were to box out 2 5-foot sections on the first and second floor, to make them inaccessible, uninhabitable, and uncountable, they would be under the square footage, but the bulk of the building would remain, and they would then be according to your math, in compliance with the 32.
No, I think the bulk would be changed in their favor if it makes any sense.
Interior.
I'm just saying, well,
losing space.
Yeah, but I'm saying that losing space is a change in bulk. The bulk is calculated by square footage.
Okay.
It's not calculated by building shadow. So if they were to add areas they can't walk into, theoretically that would reduce it.
Replace an uninhabitable, unreachable, inaccessible
Yes.
box.
Theoretically, that would reduce it and make things better for them. But nothing that I saw in the
Better for
plan for the applicant. If they were to add an impenetrable box on their first floor, it would reduce the actual square footage of the plan such that they actually would reduce their bulk. But I saw nothing in the 2023 plan that suggested that.
Let's just set
The
that.
thought experiment,
So there
yes.
is a punitive, impractical, petty way to reach the square footage compliance.
Yes, I assume what you're saying is you could instruct the applicant to put in boxes in their house.
Yes, I could. I mean, we could.
I guess. I think that would be. We'd start getting into constitutional issues here of cruel and unusual penalties.
We'll set that aside.
Yes.
I'm actually, and further, we could say you may not have a bathroom on the third floor because you may not exceed the square footage unless you find that square footage elsewhere in the building and remove it.
Yes, you could also block off the roof entirely. They changed the entire silhouette as described in 2023, but there's no way to access the attic at all. It's blocked off and it's nothing but insulation.
The attic is.
I'm just saying
not
that.
a question. The code says it doesn't count.
Yes, what I'm saying there. What I'm saying there is that anything that could possibly be even conceivably argued as being square footage in the attic could be resolved by blocking the attic off and filling with insulation. You could do things to this building that could reduce the square footage in a way that doesn't require the applicant to rebuild per se.
And it does not change the exterior appearance.
Yeah,
in any possible
there
way.
are ways that one could do that as a designer of the building. I would hesitate to suggest that the board has the capacity to make that specific determination, but I think that there are ways to design a building that way. Sure.
We could demand of the planning department to you three. You first need to figure out what the square footage. I mean, that's really. I don't know how anybody else. I mean, we can't do our job until the three of you agree what the square footage is, because you're all sworn in, lawyers notwithstanding, to tell us what you think, in your opinion, the square footage is. And we have 3 different numbers. So how is this board supposed to do our job when we have 3 professionals telling us 3 different numbers?
Well,
we have to find a compromise. We have to.
Is that a question to me, sir, or are you just suggesting?
Yeah, it is a question.
Okay.
Whose do we take?
Well, if you're going to pose the question to me, and we can all respond to this, I'm sure we will all want to. You heard the director state tonight that he already believed that the first one was over the general threshold. It was a different number than what I presented to you, but they seem to concede that the first was there.
Set that aside.
I understand. I'm just saying.
Who do we take?
I'm just saying that if you take the director's side, we're afforded relief. The only way that we get out of this circumstance without having the relief granted is if you agree with the applicant's independent calculations, and we're not reviewing the applicant. We're reviewing the director's determination, which I think, of course, is contrary to the law, and the director and the applicant, of course, think is in accordance with the law.
But further, would you argue that the only person who is qualified to provide the square footage is the licensed architect who is required by professional standards, according to the American Institute of Architects, to provide accurate drawings? They're the only person who are qualified and obligated.
I think that they are the only person who would be obligated to produce the drawings. They wouldn't be the only person who would be obligated to determine the square footage, however. The square footage calculation is not something they needed to put on this plan, and on certain iterations they didn't have that. So I think director and planning generally would be able to review that plan and determine whether or not that plan actually did have that square footage, which we think they did not do properly.
Mostly arguing. Go ahead. That's all I have.
Anyone else on the board or council? No. So this is a complicated case.
Miss,
Uh,
I'm sorry, Mr. Gallagher. I just want to confirm here. Do we expect to have any sort of rebuttals from any of the council? Because there are a few minor things that I would like to say with regards to.
go
I know.
ahead.
If you don't allow it, then I won't say it, but I would like 2 minutes.
It could be something that's very important, and I would be overruled by the circuit court if I denied you the opportunity.
If I may have 2 minutes, and I'll keep it very short.
Make it 5.
I'll try to keep it at 2, minus this little back and forth. At the very end of the applicant's argument, they suggested particular aspersions to the character of the appellants. I do respond to that by saying, first and foremost, that by virtue of Maryland case law, the only people who can bring challenges to anything are neighbors, and that neighbors are the ones who care the most.
We didn't
Yeah.
we didn't even hear that. That just goes.
I'm just saying it that was there. And the second thing with regards to how it's material, how plans are accepted and approved by DPZ, and what we were looking for was the smoking gun. I think we have a smoking gun and we were looking for bullet wounds, but to the extent that DPZ had some sort of exculpatory evidence that could have shown that it wasn't doing something in a particular way, it could have produced that and it didn't. That's all I want to say.
That's what I was saying. Yes.
Can we all be entitled to just a minute?
Of course. We've been here this long. We'll be here another few minutes.
We're here at a hearing on this matter, and the appellants have the burden of persuasion, burden of proof. There are 3 measurements here that raises the question about whether they're persuasive. I would contend that they're not been persuasive with the board, but that's your call to make. I conceded the square footage measurement that Ryan Blomley did during the summer of 2023, and I presented that as the actual measurements of the building. It exceeds it, but I've also made the point that because of the way the city's code is drafted, uninhabitable space is not counted towards the limit. So while that 3rd floor finished attic did expand with the bulk modification, it did not increase the floor area under the 3250 floor area rule. If the rule were different, we'd have a different outcome here, and I'd be presenting in a different way. But the rule is pretty clear, and it was administered by the staff consistently. And if we review the whole record of comments by the 2 reviewers reviewing the case, they consistently said, essentially, don't go over the 3250. They said that. They said that. Stay within that as they reviewed the modification. And Mr. Bromley decided that the modification, this 3rd floor attic, did not change or did not necessitate a determination of habitability. They remained, at the end of the day, remained uninhabitable. And so that's why the square footage of the building did not change through the modification.
Briefly, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zizali, I do think the set of plans, the square footage calculation we ought to rely on is the only one offered by a professional architect, the only plans which are sealed. To suggest, as the appellants have, that the director had some duty to, I'll use the word question them, is understandable, but we begin to wade very closely to that argument I made earlier as to where that duty ends and when not only the director, but all of the individuals in the Department of Planning and Zoning are entitled to rely on these professionally submitted plans. With that, I think the appellants haven't met their burden, as the director points out, and this appeal must be denied.
Mr. You'll have one question for you. And please answer it only with numbers. Would you review for me again the three numbers that go into your square foot contention? 1639,
1639 is, I'm sorry, can I have a few words behind the numbers? 1639 is Blomley's measurement. I just want to form sentences.
you adopted it.
Yes.
Go ahead.
1639 is Blomley's measurement times 2 plus 340 is what we get to. And the number that I had there, give me a second. I need to just re-add this. It is 3,618.
So,
Mr. Chairman, I'll only offer that, having been in this career 42 wonderful years, you can ask 600 professional engineers, 600 professional architects to give you the measurements, single space, and you will get 1,200 different measurements. BOMA, which is a professional organization, uses face of glass to face of glass. Other organizations measure the exterior. State of Maryland tax assessment uses the exterior, unless it's residence, and then it uses a consideration. There's also allowances that says if the measurement of a room is 12'6" or less, you use 12 foot. If it's 12'7" or more, you use 13. So there is no, my point to hold this exercise
right.
was there will never be consensus on square foot.
I buy that. So my question for you all is, a case as complicated as this one, do you want to deliberate now, or would you like to take a little break and deliberate? Do we have anyone who signed up before 12 o'clock?
We probably have a lot of public comments, sir.
Well, but we generally don't hear public comments on appeals because it's a legal issue.
I understand. I'm just saying that
It's not an
I think that
application,
people,
Mr. Chairman.
I'm not saying on my end either. I'm just saying I also believe the applicant might have wanted to say things. I'm not arguing in favor or against public comments. I'm just saying that I think people wanted to have them if you were going
Did
to
you
do
have
it.
something to say, Mr. Full?
No.
Yeah. We do typically offer older persons who are present the chance to say something if anyone would like to take advantage of that opportunity. Please. Mr. Arnett, Ward 8.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ross Arnett, 529 6th Street. And I must accept the blame for why we're all here tonight.
Very good.
Prior to becoming alderman, I was president of the Eastport Civic Association for 2 years. And during that time, we were grappling about the increased size in the houses that were being built in the ward. Upon becoming alderman, I worked with the planning staff, and by hand, I went to the SDAT data and added up all of the square footage for every resident in Ward 8, divided it to come up with an average size of the houses in the ward, which was just under 2,400 square feet, worked with the then Dirk Garrett of the planning staff, and we concluded any building that is 50% larger than the average house of the buildings in the ward should have special attention. And what we came up with is the so-called 3250 rule, which said that it has to have a public hearing before the Planning Commission. And it gave the community and the applicant the ability to justify the size of the house. I think that the fundamentals of this appeal are whether the community had the opportunity to go before the Planning Commission and discuss the size of the house. And that was the full intent. We were not looking at the interior. We weren't looking at habitable, uninhabitable. We were looking at the size of the box. If the box was bigger than 3250, it should go to the Planning Commission and have a public hearing. That is the intent of the law, and I think that that intent should be honored. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Alderman. In light of that, we've heard from the director. Does the applicant or the appellant, either one, I think we'll allow them to say something if they want to, but we're not going to have public.
I'll confer with my client if I may have a moment, but I don't know.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean by say something. Do you mean you want us to speak further? I assume you don't. Yeah, thank you.
I'm offering your client and Mr. Fulton's client a chance to address the board briefly.
I understand. Then let me have a moment.
Yeah. All right, we'll try it. No, we'll try it. See how we go. A little.
Mr. Chair, since I believe that it is clearly Mr. Hyman's intent to speak, since he's at the podium, we will have one person speak on our behalf for the appellants as well. And everyone will just have a couple minutes, I guess, from the appellees and appellants side. So we'll have Patrick Shaughnessy speak for us.
Good afternoon. My name is Gerald Hyman Jr. I'm the owner of 518 6th Street. I just have a couple brief issues. I believe Mr. Gio, he's calculating the basement, which is 1639. That's the basement doesn't count towards the square footage. That's not the same. The main level and the second floor is much smaller. So I don't know where you came up with the 3618. Okay. My other issue is if you look further into the notes on eTrack, it should be there. Tom Smith, he directed us to decrease on the rear of the house on both sides, from the basement to the first floor, second, and the loft has been decreased every bit of 6 inches to a foot each side. The bulk, so it's not a straight box where you're getting the calculation. It's been decreased. You can look at the foundation. From the foundation to the first floor, second floor, and the loft. So you looking at the loft coming straight down the side. No, it has been decreased on the inside. There was direct, specific orders from Tom Smith. So the square footage you're coming up with, I don't see where you're getting it. Not on that, one last thing. I purchased this home in December 2015. Not only did the original homeowners who owned it since 67, 68 been going through a lot. You guys saw me there. I knew the homeowners, and I saw the stairs. And as soon as I purchased it in 2015, before that, I already had a contract on the house. So I had already started working January 2016 with my first architect with the City of Annapolis. So you guys have been dragging me out, 3-4 more days, be 9 years, 3 months. So this is more. It's more. You know, it goes deep, man. And for the reason I don't know, you know, it's taking money away from from going into my house to building my house. Every week, this has gone on so far now. To every 2 weeks, I have to give a prospect. My construction loan company calls me. I have to give them a prognosis. What's going on? What's going on? I'm coming up with all kinds of stories because I got to pay for attorneys and double mortgages for over 9 years. It's ridiculous. I don't, it just doesn't make sense. I have dog feces all in my backyard for months at night. I mean, it's. I'm done. I don't even want to go no further. That's it. It's just realize that the 9 years, 3 months that my wife and I unable to sleep. I've been losing weight. I'm wondering, trying to figure out and borrow money from my mom, my dad, my grandfather. Man, this is no. Stop. No, it's not. It's wrong, man. It's wrong. They have stop work orders. Okay.
I'm sorry. I have no issue with Mr. Hyman's statements, but we agreed to one person per side.
it's. I'm sorry, but
I have to object to her testimony, sir. We agreed to one person per side.
this is prejudice. I have a lady. My grandkids and I were coming through the front. There was a lady that lives on the other side. She was on the property. There's a no trespassing sign there that say no trespassing. We don't have dogs. So why is feces there? Why is trash there? Why is she standing there saying she's coming to meet the neighbors? Why are you meeting the neighbors? You already been there. We have a video of you saying.
Ma'am, we have nothing to do with trespassing dogs in your yard.
But it's harassment.
We're going to decide.
They're putting
this
stuff in the
case.
mailbox, sir.
When you're done, we're going to decide this case. Thank you. Thanks.
Mr. Shaughnessy?
As I made for shorter people, maybe. As you said, my name is Patrick Shaughnessy. I live at 526 6th Street. I guess I was chosen to speak tonight on behalf of 19, 20 other concerned neighbors, some of which are containing the co-appellants and the co-appellants in the case. I guess we sort of bristle a little bit at the idea that planning and zoning doesn't have to check these dimensions or check these things. Who is it that's supposed to check those things? When we asked to check them ourselves.
You're addressing the board, not the director.
I understand. So if you ask me to check something myself, I'll tell you that the height of my house was overstated on the architect's drawings at 29 feet when it's actually 22.7 feet. We hired a surveyor. It's 6.3 feet against, it's an order of magnitude different. It's not about a measurement technique, right? I'm just making the point. If the planning and zoning isn't required to check dimensions, who is? Right? Yeah, and it appears that those are in error because when we look at the house, we see something that doesn't pass a look okay test. We see a house that had a full demolition, had oil tanks removed without remediation, a foundation that's too tall, a habitable third floor, a house that's towering over the neighbors' houses. Just drive down the street and look at it yourself. It's towering over the other houses. It's got a total area that's larger than the maximum allowed. And I think that's the core of the argument that we're making here. If we had had an honest chance to have public comment at a hearing, we could have addressed all of these issues, but we were denied that opportunity. The house is larger than what's allowed. Because of that allowance, we were afforded a right to have public testimony, and we've been denied that. What we're asking for is just to have that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, that concludes the hearing on this appeal, and the board will now deliberate. Thank you all very much for your thorough arguments and briefing. It was all very helpful. Especially thank the director for his special appearance tonight. I know he's a very busy guy and doesn't need to be here. So, I'll start if you want.
Yes, please. I'll respect your guidance.
Sir, did Mr. Walsh get disconnected?
Tim, did we lose Mike?
Oh, here he is. I just wanted to make sure he's here. Sorry.
Thanks. Let's go to the garage. I'm convinced that the method used by the director in determining the proper setback and percentage coverage of the required yard is within his discretion and not erroneous or contrary to law. The building height issue, I think, was resolved with the motion to dismiss. That's something that we don't get back to in this case. The accuracy of measurements, I don't know what the answer to it is. We get the government that we pay for, and we clearly don't have the staff to do what's been suggested by the plaintiffs. The director has to allocate his time in the way that, and staff's time in the way that makes most sense to him. If he spends more time measuring, he's going to slow down the process, and everybody's always complaining about how long the process takes. So I think the director has no choice, but in most cases, to rely on measurements submitted by licensed professionals. I guess someone believes that the licensed professional misbehaving, you can report them to the licensing authorities and see what they will do. But, and as I said before, we hear variance cases where we have to decide whether something posed within the rules or not, and we have to rely on those things too. We can't go out and measure. Wouldn't know how to do that anyway, what the standards were for measuring. We've got to rely on experts. And I'm not aware, no one suggested any reference that we should look to for best practices on how far the director can go in relying on measures. So, what occurs to me is that he's justified in relying on them unless there's a real red flag. Something really sticks out. So what I see as the main issue here is the 3250 square foot rule. And the director candidly and with great appreciation from me and I think the rest of the board has admitted that the original calculations were 20, 18, 20, 30, whatever square feet over, and that the third floor does add something to that. So clearly it's over. The idea that we shouldn't count part of it, the 100 or so square feet, because that's really the fault of the inspector who told them to do something they didn't need to do. That doesn't, I don't find that excuse supported anywhere in the code. So the fact is, as I see it, reported in the record, is that November 23rd approval approves a space that is larger than that permitted by the 3250 rule. The fact that some of it had been previously approved, I don't think makes any difference. This is a new approval of a new set of drawings that even somewhat increased that. So I would uphold the director's determinations with respect to everything except compliance with the 3250 rule. I would remand the case to the director for the director and the applicant to decide whether the applicant wants to go through the planning commission process or work with the director, come up with a third set of plans that will comply with the 3250 rule. And as I say that, and if the rest of the board agrees with me, it's with the full understanding, and I think everyone in the neighborhood should understand too, that if the director and the applicant go back to work and come up with another drawing that complies with the 3250 rule, the outside of that building is not going to look any different than it looks now. And I don't think that there's anything we can do about that. So that would be my suggestion. I'd love to hear from my colleague.
Chair, you struck upon exactly my line. That this is fundamentally a question of the original sin. The original sin was the 3250, and the appellants seized upon that to try to alter structure writ large. I think that is not an appropriate use of the violation. They should have sought relief in the 3250, and then they would have found a much more sympathetic pathway. And I support remanding it back and finding somewhere between 120 and 340 square feet of less. And this is where it gets nuanced, but we are powerless to the language of the code, less habitable space. That's all that means. That means certain rooms have to get a lower ceiling. That is a path to compliance. It's an unfortunate, unnecessary, necessary, I should say. And it is in many respects reinforcing what is obviously the alderman's contention, that it was never intended, the definition of habitable and usable and square footage all getting mixed together. It is reusing the same loophole that they have used for the fullness of the third floor, which sits unwell with me.
I just add one thing. Sorry, we'll get right to you, Mike. But as I see the bride's side and the groom's side back here, the community is divided. And the reason they're divided, I believe, is because the interpretation of the code by planning and zoning, and not in any way contrary to the code, but is completely contrary to common sense and common understanding of what habitable space is. And that's something that I think, as the council eventually addresses amendments to the code, might spend a little more time thinking about. So, I'm sorry, Michael, you're next.
Thank you, Bob. And I think what you're proposing is a reasonable course of action. We decided to consider the appellants asking us to hold this appeal, and when we voted to do that, I wanted to see the record. I wanted to see what the director was depending on, since there was some question about how the square footage was interpreted and calculated, what was habitable, uninhabitable. And of course, over the course of the years, from 2019 to 2021 to 23 to present day, what changed? Well, I think over the course of the last couple of months, as we produced the record, got a chance to take a look at it and to hear the pleadings from all sides. I got the sense that, on balance, I think the director and the department tried in good faith to do their job. I agree with you, Bob. All the time we depend on professionals to come in and give their opinion. That's what we ask for, because in my experience, I don't have that capability. That's why I depend on others to do it. So through the course of the process, I found illuminating in many ways of seeing the record, to see how these plans were approved based on what different interpretations. But a practical application of where we are today, what does that mean? Well, I agree with Bob. I think the garage was interpreted correctly. Height really doesn't seem to be an issue, and I think Alderman Arnett's and Christian's interpretation or analysis is pretty good too. With 3250, it's not going to change the size of the box. It's really what's inside. And I think what you're proposing for a remand to take a look. The department of the applicant take a look and get this in compliance with the 3250 rule would probably be best and fairest course of action going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Hector?
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you wholeheartedly about the 3250 rule. And the thing that puzzles me is there's 3 different square footages. And I agree that we should turn it over.
Thank you. We have a motion?
Motion to deny, well, motion to remand I guess I need to, what are we doing? We're remanding the permit, the approved permit back.
The approved site design.
Is it the permit or the site design?
Site design. Permits go to the building.
Yeah, remand the approved site design plan back to the planning department to work with the applicant to reach a consensus of 32, not to exceed 3250 in all applicable ways measurable, except the garage as drawn in the revised plans, and deny the appellant's appeal of the height.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, again, thank you all. I hope you'll be able to work this out. I know Mr. Hyman and his family are anxious to get in there. I hope when you get it, you'll enjoy it. Hope it won't take too long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the board generally.
I don't think they are. I think they're parts of a bigger one. They're not exhibits.
It's amazing to be That's great. Thanks for coming.
Chairman, Bob.